Good afternoon, and thank you for joining INSA's Wednesday Wisdom featuring Rear Admiral Mike Studeman. Before we begin, we'd like to share a video from our sponsor, Hawkeye 360. Now please welcome INSA's Vice President for Policy, Larry Hanauer.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Wednesday Wisdom. We're pleased to welcome one of the intelligence community's top leaders today for a timely conversation on U.S. intelligence priorities and military engagement in the Asia-Pacific region. But before we begin, let me make a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. More than 500 people have registered for today's discussion, but we'll do our best to get to as many audience questions as we can. Also, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call today. So as a reminder, this program is on the record. It will also be recorded and posted on INSA's website at insaonline.org. As we note at each of our events, INSA could not deliver this kind of thought leadership without the support of our partners. So I'm pleased to welcome Alex Fox, Executive Vice President of Business Development, Sales, and Marketing at Hawkeye 360, who will introduce today's speaker. Alex?
Thank you, Larry. First, I'd like to thank INSA for hosting today's program, as well as the dozens of other virtual conversations these past 15 months. INSA has done an incredible job selecting senior leaders from across our community to discuss key mission priorities, and equally important, to keep the workforce engaged and connected. It is also important that we continue to use forums like this to explore ways to maximize all of the resources available to us as a nation and to our partners and allies. Resources allow us to rapidly share actionable intelligence around the world, whether from national or tactical assets, or a proven commercial provider like Hawkeye 360. Nowhere in the world is this more important than in the Indo-Pacific, where Hawkeye 360's unique space-based ELINT satellites are providing unclassified shareable data and analytics to eliminate malign behaviors and illegal activities for our mission partners. This is why I'm especially honored to introduce our speaker. Rear Admiral Mike Studeman is a Director of Intelligence, J2 U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. The oldest and largest of the Unified Combatant Commands, Indo-PACOM is responsible for military operations in an area which encompasses roughly 52% of the Earth's surface. 7 of the 10 largest militaries, many nuclear capable. Stretching from the waters off the west coast of the United States to the west coast of India, and from the Arctic to the Antarctic. As the Indo-PACOM J2, Admiral Studeman executes intelligence operations, identifies and assesses threats, and engages partner nations to build intelligence capability, capacity, and trust to support the U.S. national security objectives, campaign plans, and theater operations, delivering quality intelligence across the theater. As a long-term thinker, he recognized nearly 25 years ago the rise of China and the importance of a proper allocation of resources to address the clear and present danger China poses to the world. As part of his career, he endeavored to prepare the U.S. for the threat that we face today and in the future from China. This lifelong experience and leadership is critical for his role as a J2. Previously, Admiral Studeman held a variety of at-sea and ashore positions throughout his long and distinguished 32-year naval career, to include senior intelligence officer roles for Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and Enduring Freedom, the first senior intelligence officer for China, a White House Fellow, which is an esteemed presidential appointed position, commander of the Hopper Information Services Center, Commander Jayok, U.S. Cyber Command, Director of Intelligence, J2 Southern Command. This incredible experience and proven leadership across multiple mission domains makes him the ideal person to lead the Indo-PACOM J2 organization. Son of a career naval officer, Admiral Studeman is a distinguished graduate of the Naval Postgraduate School, an honors graduate in Mandarin Chinese from the Defense Language Institute, and a distinguished graduate of the Naval National War College. Welcome, Admiral Studeman, and thank you for your service to our great nation.
Hey, thanks, Alex, and thanks, Larry. Appreciate having a chance to talk today, and I really look forward to the questions. I have some of them already in front of me, and I may try to knock some of those out here in the beginning. But I want to thank INSA for over 40 years of their contributions to national security, one of the most important alliances that we have here in the United States. And so, anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to perhaps give a few thoughts and perspectives from the Indo-Pacific here. So if the protocol works for you, I thought I would maybe speak for a few minutes and then turn it over for additional Q&A, and being sensitive to the fact that we don't have a lot of time. Over.
Yeah, no, that would be terrific. We'd love to hear your thoughts and get a better understanding of your priorities and focus areas for Indo-PACOM's intelligence enterprise.
Okay, well, great. I'm going to add a few more statistics about Indo-Pacific to the other ones that were listed here. Just as a reminder, 4 of the 5 largest economies in the world are out here, 7 of the 10 largest militaries in the world, 5 of the world's 8 nuclear weapons nations, 5 of the 7 U.S. security alliances are here, 60% of the globe's GDP, contributing to more than 2/3 of global growth, is out here. And those numbers will only go up. So the region is not inconsequential, as we all know. So I wanted to knock off this the first issue of the focus areas, and mine are going to be pretty straightforward here. We usually do it in 3s, as you know, to make sure that people can remember. But I have copied the Chinese approach to have the 3 strengthens. And our 3 strengthens here in the J2JIAC are combat readiness, support to competition, and partnerships. And with partnerships, I mean it in the widest sense of the word, partnerships. So what does strengthened combat readiness really mean? These have been the priorities for 2 years so far under my tenure, and they'll continue at least probably for another year as I continue in the seat. Under combat readiness, part of this is cultural, and part of this is mindset. And so having a warfighting mentality is never to be assumed. And so much of what we do internal to us is ensuring people are ready for a very bad day, and understanding that there are conditions under which we could quickly trip into initiation of various O plans here, and therefore we need to be ready at a moment's notice. And we are mindful of a quote from MacArthur a year before we entered World War II. You may recall it when he said, the history of failure in war can be summed up in 2 words: too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy, too late in realizing the mortal danger, too late in preparedness, too late in uniting all possible forces for resistance. So MacArthur's quote has a great deal of cachet for us here. And so we have an obligation to make sure that we are increasing our preparedness every day for things that are happening in our theater now that are either advantageous to us or disadvantageous to us. And the accumulation of those advantages or disadvantages are very meaningful. And thus the importance of readiness for a combat environment, but also readiness for the day-to-day competition. So part of readiness to fight is the resiliency we all know well. Part of this for us is better exploiting sensitive intelligence and getting it to places where it can actually be actioned to reduce vulnerabilities for the blue side or open up opportunities for us as we think about how we want to engage and use not just DoD assets, but other interagency assets. It involves all of the high fidelity support that you're used to, which is the plans, exercises, charting, et cetera. And for us, we have elevated the RED perceptions as a starting point for all our operations, our activities, our investments. And so RED teaming, emulations, wargaming, all those sorts of things are key to making sure that we have the right perspective and that we understand the dynamic that exists between multiple parties here. It's not just you have a campaign plan where blue preconceives what you're going to do and doesn't change in execution mode. This is about dynamically ensuring that you can operate the assets given to you smartly for the right effects, and you're prepared to adjust based on the feedback that you get on whether or not the effects are being achieved. In competition, for us, this includes indications and warning, making sure we understand how the adversaries are employing their forms of influence throughout the region. Part of this is intel support to messaging and influence, which we can talk about more if you'd like. Part of this is being able to visualize what the competition looks like. And part of this goes back to assessment, effects assessment, and how to calibrate and change based on the circumstances that you are facing. In our third category of partnerships, that's for us, part of it is the Intel enterprise here within the theater, external to the theater, across the defense intelligence community. Part of this is, of course, with partners with Intel diplomacy and Intel sharing. I have blitzes on. I call them the information sharing blitzes, but I think that should be the norm, not the exception. And we are embarking and have been doing so for quite some time, maximizing our sharing across most of our partners. Partnerships also with the Intel community writ large, and then making sure we maximize the potential of every intelligence discipline available to us. So those are the three focus areas with a little bit of the subtext that we put underneath them. And I'd stop here and see if there are any questions on that before moving on.
Terrific. Well, you've mentioned a few issues that I think we want to get to, especially just in highlighting those priorities. One of them I'd like to touch on. You mentioned the importance of indications and warning in a variety of different contexts. And of course, you said one of your key missions is to make sure that people are prepared for what could be a very bad day. And I guess that can come in a number of different forms. So let me ask a question. And in fact, we got this question from Charlie Allen, who is a 50-year veteran of the CIA, who had previously served as the National Intelligence Officer for Warning. And he asked something that gets to your initial comments. Are we well positioned to give strategic warning of potential conflicts in the region, whether that's a Chinese attack on Taiwan, North Korean missile strike, or any other crisis that could result in what you said could be a very bad day?
Thanks for that. I used to work for Charlie Allen. Actually, he picked me up as a White House fellow at the Homeland Security Department, and he grabbed me one day, and I became his special assistant for most of my time as a White House fellow. And probably the highest learning opportunity I ever had. I have a list of quotes I've never heard from anybody else's mouth that I still keep. That I think I have 4 pages of them. But the wisdom just dripped off Charlie, and I'm really fortunate to have had such a close association with him, starting back then. So it's a great question. And I would say that we have strategic warning on all of our major issues. I feel comfortable with the amount of access that we have. I guess the issue for us is that we've given strategic warning. And I'm reminded of the Kissinger quote about, well, you've given me warning, but you haven't persuaded me. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering in Washington, how many folks are truly persuaded by the warning which the intelligence community has already provided regarding the dangers that exist within this decade, soon now, with regard to the nature of the Chinese threat and how it manifests and what to do about it. And so for us, it isn't that we haven't diagnosed the challenge, that we don't know the intent. The question with everything is timing for specific moves, I guess is the way to put it. So there's a difference between strategic warning and operational and tactical warning. And so I feel comfortable that we have enough sensing in place to give us some amount of time. But the issue is, even if you had let's say 90 days of strategic warning for Taiwan, whether or not we have postured ourselves, we have built up the capacities and the capabilities that we need to be able to handle the type of scenario which may be unfolding. And that's been part of INDOPACOM's feedback from multiple combatant commanders over time, which you can read about in the testimonies that they have given with regard to whether or not we are accurately understanding the time elements associated with the danger.
Right. So on the point that you raised about not only having the intelligence needed to warn of an attack, but also being persuasive, can you tell me how you would persuade a policymaker to take this threat seriously? What overall messages do you have about the Chinese threat to persuade people to take the information that we have seriously?
I think that part of the problem is a larger one where, frankly, it's hard to get a lot of attention to certain kinds of scenarios if they are perhaps remote or improbable. And so there's an issue of a war certainly being alerting to us, but we in the United States, I think, see war as a historical anomaly. For the Chinese, the Russians, North Koreans, Iranians, every day is a day of war in terms of the continuous struggle for advantage and disadvantage for influence. And this is where we may be failing to see the real danger. The fundamental political aspects of the issues at hand along the surfaces of the globe. And so we would say the danger is clear and present already. Many have recognized this. We are mustering up our best plans, policies, actions to deal with it, but the scale of it is incredible. The breadth and scope and depth of it is absolutely awesome. And it has every dimension that we saw in the 20th century exists here in the 21st century. You can avoid the word Cold War, and that's fine, but the degree of action that we need to take is of the magnitude of what we applied in the previous century, and we're not there yet as a nation in understanding how to, in fact, employ our energy, our treasure, to be able to grapple with it. And so what are we warning about? Well, it's danger on all fronts. And this idea that it's only a Taiwan scenario versus many other areas where the Chinese are being highly assertive, coercive, is a failure in understanding complexity, because it's not that simple. Let's just wait till we have warning of a Taiwan amphibious assault, and then we'll move things and we'll take care of it. That is one scenario. Frankly, it may not be the most likely. You take a look at the degree of pressure that China is placing on lots of its neighbors, but if you want to just talk Taiwan, the kinds of things they've done to change facts on the ground, the other elements of information, economic leverage that they've been placing, it's already a struggle underway. Whether or not the Chinese resort to a military option is in question. To us, it's only a matter of time, not a matter of if. Because right. If you understand the problem set, you understand that Taiwan will unlikely fold based on economic and informational and diplomatic influence alone. Over.
Right. So do you see then the potential for conflict, not just with Taiwan, but I guess the growth of Chinese influence throughout the region? I mean, it's political, it's economic, it's military. Do you think the U.S. intelligence community has sufficient insight into all elements of those challenges to understand how Chinese influence might evolve, how China might act in certain circumstances, or are there certain areas where the U.S. lacks the insight it needs to make important policy decisions?
Yeah, I think that the intel community needs to grapple with the idea of how much it needs to invest in economic intelligence. It's been a taboo topic, except if you're using that economic intelligence to judge the strength of a nation and how it might then use that wealth to translate into capabilities along different fronts. I think that's insufficient to need. And so we've got to probably come to terms with the idea of how much awareness and sensing and analysis and production we need to do to provide better understanding of exactly where there may be approach points across key terrain countries, and be able to understand the developments in time to muster up action on our side, whether it's informing, advising, shaping, influencing, but doing it in time to make a difference, and not simply resigning ourselves to fait accomplis and consequence management, which has been our mode. We need to be in the prevent and shape more often. And frankly, we haven't postured ourselves to have the sensing to buy back that decision space for our leaders. Over.
Right. So let me ask a question about that economic intelligence piece that also links into some military issues. And that's looking at China's global ambitions, not just in East Asia and Southeast Asia, but also around the world. China's demonstrated global ambitions through the Belt and Road Initiative and other programs, which not only increase Chinese economic influence and political influence in countries in Africa, in Latin America, and around the world, but it also enables the Chinese military to expand its global reach through access to major seaports and sea lines of communications. So how concerned are you regarding China's expanding global ambitions, economic, but also the military influence and access that tends to follow with that kind of economic and political access? And how should the U.S. respond?
Yeah, it should be everybody's interest area, because it's happening, and the China challenge is obviously a global one. I still hear people talk about that China has regional ambitions, and for us, it's a yes and. It's yes and the rest of the world. And so it's just funny how some people are still caught in the thinking of, 5, 10, 15 years ago on this. And so we need to understand this as a Chinese rejuvenation. Their dream is to, in fact, not just be a leading power in a multipolar system, but the leading power. That means surpassing the United States by almost any measure.
Right.
And until we come to terms with that reality, I think we're going to set our expectations too low about what actions we need to undertake and what policies we need to commit to. And so that's what Xi Jinping's course looks like here, and he's been very aggressive across the way. And I would just tell you, it's very Machiavellian. The end justifies the means. The dream justifies achieving that dream at almost any cost. And so it's not unfair to say that the Chinese rise has come through lying, cheating, and stealing. I mean, I can break down each of those areas for you, but they are united in this sense of inevitability, that they are on the rise and that we are on the decline. And the rabidness with which they pursue it is pretty awesome. Now it backfires. Clearly, there is a price that the Chinese seem to be almost tone deaf to here, and that is that some of their tactics really are starting to turn off a lot of nations out there who don't like the look of a more powerful China and how it's acting when it has strength. And so these will be, important areas for us to exploit and to work with our partners on. The dangers have become more apparent, and part of it, as you know, has come through with the sort of Wolf War diplomacy, the heavy-handedness with COVID support, the demand for gratefulness, a number of other things. These are just a taste of what it looks like when China is strong and confident. And I think it's starting to scare a number of different nations in different corners of the globe. Over.
Yeah, certainly we've seen that in Hong Kong and Xinjiang and other regions as well. Let me turn to some military programs so we can understand a little bit about how the U.S. military is preparing to address these threats. And so there are two programs or two initiatives I want to ask about. One is the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which Congress created to focus resources on military capabilities to deter China. And the administration has proposed spending a little bit more than $5 billion in the next fiscal year on this program. And then soon after President Biden was inaugurated, he commissioned a task force to assess DoD's China-related programs and recommend new courses of action for the department. So how will the Pacific Deterrence Initiative improve military capabilities and intelligence capabilities in particular? And how will the DoD task force's recommendations also affect intelligence collection and prioritization?
That's a good question. We're just as interested to see how much we actually are able to get support for through the Pacific Defense Initiative. Right now, there are many things that are being labeled as PDI, which were pre-existing programs that are perhaps related to the Pacific. And so, you know, what real money and support comes through it is something we don't have clarity on yet. We appreciate the support in certain parts of Congress for this and within DoD. I mean, our perspective out here has been, look, we never had OCO, like CENTCOM and others had OCO. We didn't have a European Defense Initiative or ERI when they retermed it. And so we just haven't had anything other than the base capabilities here, and we've remained you know, relatively static and unable to pursue some of the things that we've described for many years now. And so when it comes to posture, when it comes to the ability to be more expeditionary, more rotational, with more capability west of the international date line, the ability to work more closely with partners on a variety of different objectives, you need wherewithal. And if you don't have wherewithal, then don't expect us to achieve some of our larger ambitions anytime soon. So PDI was meant to address some of that. And so we'll see what kind of juice you get that's additive and above and beyond what already has been slated for us to be able to be enabled in that direction.
Yeah. Okay. In the interest of time, let me combine questions on two new domains for potential conflict where China's increased its capabilities: space and cyber. Certainly, China's rapidly expanded its use of space-based assets for military purposes, including countering U.S. space-based capabilities. And we've seen what China can do in the cyber domain. So what concerns you the most about Chinese space and counter space capabilities and cyber capabilities, and how China might deploy them in a conflict or perhaps in the run-up to a conflict?
Yeah, I mean, they're already in play, right? So the sheer amount of capability they can throw at the problem with cyber is causing problems for not just the United States, but many nations out there. The intellectual property theft is affecting everybody and has contributed to China's rise. And so the cybersecurity issues that we've been grappling with for a long time now have not been, you know, fixed. You have a lot of people doing God's work out there trying to defend their networks, but when they are built to be infirm from the minute the software is disseminated, then you're in a losing battle. And so this idea of where our standards need to be, how we hold people to account for, you know, weak architectures, what we need to do to support on the training side, all of that is really important to try to strengthen our own house. There's very clearly no deterrent so far to Russian, Chinese, Iranian, you know, North Korean behavior there in the cyber realm. And so they are clearly a threat every day of the week. On the space side, the amount of investment that China's putting into ASAT weapons, from dazzling to jamming to, kinetic kill from the ground, from space, all of that, they're on the march. They take a look at our space capabilities and want to equal and exceed those and be able to dominate, to guarantee themselves the maneuvering that they need to be able to secure their objectives, if they're in a fight. And so it's clear as day what they're putting into the investments. You can pull up any Intel product to show the next 10 years of where we think the Chinese will go. And so the question is how much we'll, invest in on our side. Now, we do have a substantial amount of activity going on. We recognize the threat here, and it'll be a game of, measures and countermeasures and countermeasures for some time to come.
Right.
Very competitive area.
Right. Let me just build on that a little bit by asking a question about a broader use of technology. How concerned are you about China's use of advanced technologies like quantum computing or artificial intelligence, particularly in the military domain?
Yeah, they're after it. The amount of investment they have to make sure that they can work AI/ML into their decision-making processes has led them to be near the forefront, depending on what aspect of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and supercomputing you're talking about. They are on the leading edge, next to, exceeding in some areas, maybe slightly behind in others. But that's how I would rate where they are. They clearly see the advantages. And I would just add one more thing, which sometimes people don't connect, but is worth thinking about. This idea of how their IT proliferates around the planet and the access that they have to data allows them to have a larger set of data that they can run to be able to actually allow the machine learning to learn faster, right? And so he or she who has the most data and begins first can learn the quickest and therefore have the information advantage over time. And the sheer amount of data access that they have through their proliferating IT and the key nodes that they've been able to essentially get a grip on, plus the intelligence accesses that they have when they aren't invited in, but they let themselves in, will give them a tremendous advantage. And we have to be very attuned to how all of this fits together. Over.
Right. Let me turn to a few audience questions on China, and then we'll get back to some other topics, because you do have 30 some odd other countries in your AOR, so it would be good to try to talk about them at least briefly. So a question came in from Jim Keffer, retired Air Force Major General, now with Lockheed Martin. And he asks, given the Chinese government's crackdown on internal dissent, including in Hong Kong, how stable do you think is China's future? How much can the CCP continue to crack down until the population gets to a boiling point?
I think they can crack down a lot more, and you'll find that the control system, the big brotherish sort of Orwellian system that they have is very capable, from People's Armed Police to the MSS and lots of other different government institutions, and simply the way that they've structured themselves here. Yeah. So it's a monolithic society, right? It's a large, but there's a strong capability for them to do even more. So whether talking Xinjiang or Hong Kong, those are emblematic of areas where the Chinese have essentially attempted to get quote unquote effective control. Yeah. And so this is a foreshadowing of what Chinese effective control will look like in other places, including, take a look at every push out point. It's happening across every point of the compass here. So internally, I think it is what it is. And I don't think there's going to be a rebellion of sorts that maybe the questioner implies. But this issue of how China is using these same techniques to establish effective control over, the line of actual control with India, or the areas around Bhutan, which haven't got a lot of press that should, right. Areas in the Mekong, the South China Sea, Senkakus, the Taiwan issues. resource exploitation, lots of other areas. I mean, it's pretty incredible how the Chinese have been able to put all of the institutions in place to be able to command and control and be able to push out with multiple simultaneous efforts. The old days were that the Chinese wouldn't onboard one crisis at a time. That's long gone. They're happily able to, in fact, manage a number of different areas where they are being assertive, and will do so ideally in a very creeping sort of expansionist way. But those are the things we have to worry about perhaps more than the internal activities there. I just don't see that there will be sufficient dissension that will actually mount a serious challenge to Beijing. There will be riots, there'll be economic hardships that result in continued localities that will react, but the police and military and other enforcement agencies, I think, will be able to handle those over.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask a question here regarding Chinese collaboration with Russia. This came in from Melissa Hathaway, former White House cyber advisor. And she asks for your point of view on Russian-Chinese collaboration, particularly in the Arctic and oil exploration and telecom.
Right. So Putin and Xi are good friends, closer relationship than allies. So those are the quotes you get. Look, we talked a lot about how the worst thing ever is if China and Russia got together. We talked about this over and over again, and the Chinese and the Russians looked at it and said, let's play on the American fear. And so they've accentuated the relationship in both real and substantive terms, as well as in many of the highly symbolic as well, in order to become a more united front and essentially create dilemmas and anxiety here, because we talked about it. And so you shouldn't be surprised with the direction they're going in. How real it is in different levels is the question of the day. I'll just tell you that from our vantage point, there are limits to the cooperation, but it's probably deeper than you think, across more fronts than you think. And so let's say we'll pick military exercises. They do some large exercises together, and they are certainly co-located and they are deconflicted. The degree of integration of those military exercises may not be as strong as they would like you to believe, right? And so that won't stop them from doing more activities together, but there are some limits that we've seen with regard to their willingness to share everything and operate seamlessly together. That's just one example of where we see that they can be cautious. And so where that line is, we study that very closely, and it's part of our priority intelligence requirements, as you might suspect.
Right. So if China is partnering to some degree with Russia, it also has an adversary in the region in India. So what role does India play in regional security in the Asia Pacific, and what are the most important elements of the U.S. defense relationship with India?
Yeah, the Chinese blundered with pushing out within the western border area. They are the ones that initiated that crisis. And they probably couldn't anticipate, the effects of it, but then they had to own it. And I'll just tell you that the Indians are strategically moving away in alignments from where it had been going with China. And I would tell you that they don't want to be aligned with anybody, but there has been a warming with the United States and others in the region here. And we are working with them on a number of different fronts here. And look, we have a shared interest in the dangers that China has presented, and so it's not surprising that we are working together. I think there's a lot more steps we can take along the road to strengthening the relationship with India, but it's it is stronger perhaps than it's ever been today. And we do not intend to push beyond what New Delhi is willing to do here. We very much respect where the Indians are and their strategic interests. But I do think that the sea change there has been something driven solely by China's unilateral actions there. And it's an example of the tone deafness that I was talking about earlier. Over.
Right, makes sense. We have a few minutes left. Let me turn to a question that we've gotten on a popular topic regarding your intelligence analysis capabilities, and that's looking at open source intelligence. We've gotten questions on this from Mark Quantuck of Babel Street, Scott Feldmeyer of Barbaricum, and also Robert Ashley, retired DIA director. And they all ask in one way or another how INDOPACOM integrates open source intelligence into your analyses and into your collection plans.
You had a ringer with General Ashley in there. He helped set up a cadre of open source specialists, and I think his move was timely and smart. And so you can't make everybody into an OSINT subject matter expert, but you can build up that core force and distribute it so they can be, teachers to others, and that's sort of in motion, and we appreciate kind of where that is going. Look, there's going to be more and more publicly available information. We touch it, it becomes OSINT, and so we've got to learn how to deal with all of these sources and validate and verify and integrate. And it's a massive problem. The investment in the new database system, the MIDB follow-on Mars, does have a lot of those OSINT tools integrated in that are eye-watering in terms of some of their capabilities, but there are a lot more that are out there, right? And so we exploit them to the best of our ability and bring in the open source piece of all of this as part of the multi-infusion. There is a volume problem, as everyone knows. There is the veracity issue, but we're on path. We just need to get even better at it. I will tell you that we also contract out for open source analysis through a number of different think tanks and others. So we're not alone in this regard. There is a federation of trusted partners that we also employ to be able to make us a little bit sharper and better in this area.
Great. Well, let me just ask one last question with the few minutes we have left. Since you mentioned work that you contract out and other trusted partners you collaborate with, a number of those partners are interested in innovation. Earlier this year, INDOPACOM laid out among the areas that would guide the command's approach in the region, a focus on experimentation and innovation. So in the intelligence domain, what kind of experimentation and innovation are you looking for, and how can the private sector help you?
Thanks for the question. Experimentation innovation is sort of a big rubric, a large umbrella that can have many things underneath it. I'll just tell you just a few examples of how we are trying to move things forward in this direction. We're working with DIA. We're part of the test bed for the use of Mars in the targeting cycle. We're hoping to work with them to operate order battle, sort of minimal viable product. So I think that relationship is strong and will help by having real operational use cases essentially for where that database needs to go. In other areas, there's a thing called global information dominance experiments, and there are a bunch of tools that multiple combatant commands are looking at that we are trying to apply to some of our problem sets. So you'll be happy to know that there's a great deal of effort under the so-called guide experimentation line. We have other things here we're working on. There's an automated databasing tool that we use to track red activities. We're in partnership with DIA on that. We're looking at, we have some relationships with NRO, and thank God they invested in a number of different tools, the FADE MIST suite of tools that have like Thresher, Bodhi, et cetera. And so, those are some of the best athletes out there, and we have a number of different folks who are working elements of those tools and how it applies to us. Our experimentation includes things like thinking about fighting hurt, and what do we do if communications is essentially impeded, and so we have deployable JWICS capabilities that we can plug in that won't be so dependent on landline there for a bad day. We also work at trying to display the gray zone common intelligence picture, how to display what competition looks like. We have some cross-domain intelligence fusion work going on, automated target recognition. I mean, the list is long and probably too boring for you, but it's enough to say we're playing and we're trying to do our part to advance the ball here for the entire defense intelligence enterprise. Over.
Right. No, that's great. It's certainly not boring. And in fact, we could go on for a long, long time talking about issues we haven't touched on, including some regional dynamics with other adversaries like North Korea or Russia, or partnerships and intelligence sharing with allies and partners in the region. But I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. So Admiral Studeman, thank you very much for joining us from Honolulu today, and for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for the opportunity, and look, I'm available if people want to do follow-ups. Happy to do those. So thanks for the opportunity just to convey a few perspectives on this end.
That's great. We appreciate it, and we hope to have you engaged in some other events in the future. So for all of you watching online, thank you as well for taking the time to join us. And of course, thank you to Hawkeye 360 for supporting this program. When the webinar ends, a short survey will pop up on your screen. Please take a moment to complete it and let us know how we did. So later this month, next week from July 12th through 16th, we'll hold our virtual symposium on the new IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men. For an hour each day next week, senior leaders from government and industry will discuss the importance of empowering women in the intelligence community. Then on July 21st, we welcome Misty Tuller, NRO's Chief Financial Officer and Director of Business Plans and Operations, to our Wednesday Wisdom program. Looking further ahead, registration is now open for our 8th Annual Intelligence and National Security Summit. Held in partnership with AFCEA International, this year's program will take place in person at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center in National Harbor on September 13th and 14th. We have a terrific speaker lineup. DNI Haynes will provide the opening keynote remarks. The directors of NSA, NRO, and DIA will join us for a discussion of strategic intelligence challenges, and senior leaders from across government, industry, and academia will share insights on a range of critical national security challenges. And finally, registration is now open for the William Oliver Baker Award Dinner, taking place on Saturday, September 25th at the Omni Showroom in Washington. We expect nearly 700 intelligence and national security leaders to be on hand to celebrate the former Principal Deputy DNI, the Honorable Sue Gordon. It should be a really memorable evening. You can find the full lineup of our virtual events at insaonline.org. This concludes today's program. Stay safe and healthy, and have a wonderful afternoon.